My man! Welcome to the show. How are you? Really excited as a parent and as a person of color to have our guest today. Hey, what's up, everybody? Hey guys, what's up? It's Irfan on the SunnySide Up podcast. I'm really excited to introduce my next guest. His name is Keith Costello, and before I let him introduce himself and sort of share a little bit about his background, I want to just highlight the fact that he is a global leader in the technology space. He's spent more than, I think, a couple of decades leading multiple technology companies on a global level. He's rubbed shoulders with some of the highest C-suite executives around the country. These are well-known figures in the tech space, and I'm proud to know him. Keith, before I have you sort of introduce yourself, from the moment I met you, one of the things that I noticed about you and why I wanted you on this podcast is, despite being as busy as you are, despite, every time I talk to you, you're usually in a different city or a different part of the world, you're very deliberate and thoughtful in how you approach building relationships. And so I want to get into that a little bit. I mean, just the time that you took, I was asking you some really simple questions and you stopped everything that you were doing. And I felt like I was the only person in the world that existed. And not many people, I think, at your level do that. So that's part of the reason, full disclosure, that I wanted you to share your story. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But if I can turn it over to you and just sort of, if you can explain your background and how you got started a little bit, that would be awesome.
Sure. Irfan, thank you so much for the kind words, and I really do appreciate it. Ultimately, business is about people. I recently read a blurb by Bill McDermott, who I worked for and have gotten to know as both a colleague and a friend. And he said, we all start with family. We start this, in this world as part of a family, and we grow up, and then we meet other people through school, and we learn how to operate in a social environment, and eventually we end up in the professional world, and the part of your extended family becomes those that you work with. And he was kind of espousing on this concept, and it really resonated with me because I learned early on, and this is part of just my upbringing, I guess, that I'm an introvert. If you look at the Myers-Briggs, I'm INTJ. I'm introvert. You would never guess that by meeting me because of just the way that I roll. But the fact of the matter is that I prefer a good book and contemplation and isolation and thought. And, introversion in the Myers-Briggs doesn't mean introvert like the way we think of it, the way people normally describe it. It's more about how you operate and how you process information. So in any case, I learned that family can be extended early on. I don't think I expressed it the way Bill did, but I knew it to be the case. And so I knew that relationships that you build can stand the test of time and can frankly last a lifetime. So, this is just the way that I approach life, but life is ongoing. It's 24/7. And so it infuses its way into how you operate in the work world. You asked about my background and how I got to where I am. I went to Cal in Berkeley, and I had come to Berkeley by way of Connecticut. So very, very different places. I was raised in Connecticut, and I chose to go 2,500 miles across the country to go to college, where I knew not a single person on the university campus. Okay. And it was probably one of the biggest risks I had ever taken, because who knew how it would turn out? And it turned out great. I fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the Bay Area. And so I wanted to stay. All my job offers at the time when I was graduating were in New York. There's one job offer I got in the Bay Area, one, from this crazy company called Oracle, who had just recently gone public and had taken out a full-page ad in the Daily Cal, our student newspaper, and said, "World's fastest relational database management system." I had no idea what a relational database management system was. And I did not have a background in programming. And so they took a chance on me. I had two offers from Oracle. We used to go through these all-day interview cycles where you'd go and meet with 8 or 10 people. You were exhausted by the end of it. And the whole idea was to come out of the back end having impressed 1 or 2 people such that you get an offer. I had 2 offers, one either to go into sales or to go into a brand new product group at Oracle. I chose to go into the product group because I didn't feel like I could sell something I knew nothing about. I needed to learn about the product. I needed to learn how it was constructed, how it was, why clients used it, what did they think about it, what value did it add. And so I went to work for this small team. It was about 40 people. It eventually became Oracle's applications business. It was called the Oracle Financials team. Wasn't a group, wasn't a division, wasn't anything. It was just a group of people, very smart people, some of the smartest people I'd ever met, building stuff that nobody thought they could build, but using the Oracle tools and database as a foundational layer to build financial applications. With that, we were well aware of those today, but back then it was kind of like, Oracle's building those, nobody knew. So I spent a good deal of time at Oracle, eventually getting into more customer facing roles. It turned out that my my acumen was better suited in the field than it was building code, which I wasn't too good at. And so I eventually got into the field organization, into consulting, and had some great mentors there. And I have to say, when you talk about the trajectory of one's career, in the early days, it always starts with 1 or 2 people who impact you, who affect you, who advise you in a way that you take those golden nuggets that you get as a young professional, and they help shape the person that you become, the professional that you become over time. And so I had some great mentorship in my later stages at Oracle, and those individuals, and watching the way that they comported themselves internally, how they drove things, how they drove strategy, the leadership skills that they had, and how they interacted with clients, customers. And mostly what they did, and it was fascinating to me, was listen. It really wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't say. They listened. And it's amazing when you get in front of customers, you have to have some questions. And you usually, if you're smart, you've prepared those in advance. But what I learned early on was the notion of listening and how important that is. And having been, over the course of my career, a consultant, I knew that listening, was important, because that's how you get the answers. And you don't get them by talking. And so it became very important for me, and very early on, to understand the art of listening and to lead the conversation, not necessarily into a preconceived place, but to lead it in such a way that you could get more and more information from the customer. And so, and I go back and forth on the customer client word, simply because, in consulting, we typically refer to them as clients, and in software, we call them customers. It's the same thing. And it's just a different reference point, I guess. So I spent a lot of time in tech. I've worked at very large companies, the biggest of which is probably IBM, and startups, with less than 1,000 people, and in hyper growth mode. I mean, growing at 30, 40, 50% a year. When I first joined Oracle, we were doubling every year. That was nuts. And so eventually Larry Ellison brought on board some very, very seasoned, Jeff Henley, who became the CFO, Ray Lane, who became the president, chief operating officer, the guy who I work for, Sandy Sanderson, who ran global consulting. He was an ex-McKinsey partner. These were highly seasoned people who demanded a level of professionalism, a level of order, in the chaos. And they understand the creative aspects of letting people have space to be creative, but they also knew that when you're dealing with customers who have deliverables in mind and are paying you for deliverables, they want those things done in a certain budget over a certain period of time, with a methodology attached to it that they could get their arms around. So I learned some things early on, and then eventually took that knowledge and applied it to different kinds of environments. And so, most of my background is in sales, services, and what we today call customer success, which has become over the last decade or so, become a very large part of what software companies in particular focus on, because the success of customers, which really translates, if we get to its raw base, into adoption, into usage, into delight. How delighted are customers with your solution? And the question always is, will they renew, right? Renewal is the relationship.
Right.
That
So
means,
it's
yeah,
less a catchphrase and it's much more used to connote how you're driving value, how you're ensuring that that client customer is going to renew your services. And oftentimes these are contracts that are millions of dollars.
yes, that's
Mhm,
true.
mhm,
When you talk about some of the largest SaaS companies like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Workday, and I mean, these companies have very large annuity contracts.
mhm,
And
mhm.
we're starting to see even SAP get more and more into very, very large annuity contracts. And so customer success, how you manage that customer through the life cycle. It used to be, software sales professionals would sell a solution and then just move on. And that's how they were paid. That's how they were trained. That's how they were motivated. Today, that's not the way things work. It's much better for the customer, because the customer gets the attention they need on an ongoing basis, instead of only when there's something new to sell. That's not really optimally. It was great for the software companies because they get a whole bunch of money right up front, a whole bunch of revenue,
Right.
and be able to recognize it in the quarter. Now all that revenue gets recognized over time, and software companies have become very smart about customer success and the ongoing renewal rates, and all the metrics they put in place, so they can do this at scale and really serve their customers. It creates a much better relationship with the customer. And the customer, by the way, and this was the brilliance of Mark Benioff and Salesforce and that whole group very early on, was you only bought what you need.
Right. Let's go back a little bit. A lot of these companies that you referenced, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, and others, the founders of those firms and folks like you as well were almost part of the same cohort of graduates, if you will, from the early days at Oracle, Microsoft, and similar companies. Can you go back and because in that sort of in the I think Microsoft and Oracle went public around the same time. I think 1986 in June or something like that, within months of each other,
Yes.
and both were, like as you said, growing at an incredibly rapid rate. Describe to me what it was like being there and being relatively green at that time. How were you processing all that information, learning how to be a leader in those environments, learning how to be successful in those? I mean, it clearly worked because you ended up as as somebody who's very well known in your industry. But go back and tell me what the younger version of you was thinking and how you were adapting so quickly.
I think one of the things that helped me was actually going to Cal. And the reason for that is, I mentioned I took this risk and I didn't know anybody. I had to make friends. I had to, build a network, etc. And I'll never forget, in my freshman year, I got some advice. And that advice was very simple. It's from a fraternity brother of mine. He said, Keith, if you're on campus and you see a line, get in it. Then find out what the line's for. Right? That turned out to be very, very important, sage, words of advice. It was just the mindset. It was the mindset. Act, right? Have a bias for action. And so one of the things when I got to Oracle in the early days, and it was sort of chaotic, to be honest with you. I mean, they were hiring the number of people they were hiring, quarter. They had boot camps. I was in a boot camp with like 40 people, and we were all going into all different groups, all different backgrounds. There were people there who had gone to, MIT Sloan School of Business, Harvard Business School, undergrads like me, a whole bunch of us just together to kind of learn the basics for 3 weeks. And, There was no script. There was the training was all about the products, not about how Oracle expected you to operate. And then you're put into a group. And so, one of the things that I did, and this goes back to my Cal roots, was to have a bias for action and not to sit back and wait for somebody to tell me what to do, to try to be proactive in some way. If don't let a lack of experience inform everything that you do. In other words, go out and ask people, question things. And everybody was very open to this. And the good thing is this group, by the way, was being run by a very seasoned executive who had built a company before he came to Oracle that built these kinds of applications. Now, the reason why he hired me, this is an interesting story. I'll never forget saying, his name was Jeff Walker. I said, Mr. Walker, in the interview process, I said, I'm not really sure I know what a financial application is, because he had kept using that term. I go, I know accounting. I took accounting. I got a good grade and I understand economics, but I'm not so sure I know what a financial application is. And I just want, I want to be completely transparent with you and honest with you. And he leans over his desk and he's wearing this beautiful suit. And back then they wore suits in tech. And he leans over and he looks at me and he's got this little glimmer in his eye. And he goes, Keith, you don't know how perfect you are for this job. And you know what he meant by that? He didn't want anybody coming in with like a bias and, these preconceived notions of how software had been built before. Because all those people are just going to tell him why he can't do things and why this is impossible. And that's going to take twice as long as you've given me time for all this stuff. He had all these folks, who were relatively young, working for him, who didn't know that, when he gave us an impossible task, we said, okay, we're just going to work on Saturdays. We're going to work 6 days a week instead of 5, and we'll get it done. And then we'll sneak in some stuff on Sunday. And we just worked really hard. And so I would say that my background at a very large public university where nobody's handing you anything,
Right.
You have to go get it, is kind of what, prepared me for a place like Oracle. And then, as I said, over time, and this was longer in the process because I was there for almost 10 years, I started to get sort of the professional management and mentorship that I could mimic, because that's what you do when you're young, right? You see things that work, you see things that impress you or that inspire you. And those are the things that you take with you and you start to do as you get more and more responsibility. And because I was in a company and in an environment in the first 4 or 5 years I was in this product group, I was spending a lot of time in the field, which is why they eventually asked me to move there. But what happened was I just kept getting more. They'd hire another 40 people, and the group went from 40 to 100 like in less than a year. And so they're like, well, Keith, you gotta manage these 10 people and tell them what to do. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So you just figured it out. You sat down, you created a plan. I ran the plan by, eventually we got a VP in there to help us out who actually knew how to run product management. And we were like, kind of, how is this good? No, add this. And remember, yes, we do have to test the stuff. We got to have a testing phase, this kind of thing. So.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I remember reading about these companies when I was growing up. I would read Forbes and Fortune and these different publications about just the growth and how discerning they were at who they hired and what a rocket ship ride it was to work there, and how careful they were with, they only hired people from the best schools, the smartest people from those schools. So it's really it's interesting to hear sort of how you started. What were sort of the top lessons that, as you began to get comfortable in your role as a leader? I know you mentioned how important listening is to you, and that's sort of where you seek out answers from folks, whether they're clients or internally. But as you became a leader, were there specific folks that gave you lessons that you kept with you, or throughout your career? Or were there specific people and specific lessons that you could share?
Well, yes. I mean, I remember as an early professional spending, time with these these mentors at Oracle and seeing how they operated. Now, Ray Lane had a background as a Booz Allen, one of the 3 top people at Booz Allen. And so when he left and he came to Oracle, he very much brought that sort of consultative. He had a very different perspective. He was like, we need a strategy, and we need a strategy that is simple to understand. And from there, each team, and he had very large teams working for him. I think eventually he had consulting, all of sales, all of marketing, you name it. Anything in the field worked for Ray. And so his perspective was, we need to galvanize all these folks around the things that are important. One of the things that was important, that he had these strategic intents, is what he called them. And these strategic intents, there were like 5 of them, as I recall, was going from one place, one mindset, one perspective, one perception in the marketplace to another. So one of them was going from a technology provider to a solution provider. And what he meant by that was going from just selling tools to selling solutions and applications. Oracle at the time was not viewed as an applications provider. It was viewed as a database and tools provider for the most part. And then there was other stuff. Eventually, it's obviously morphed into something a lot more than that. But, at the time, he was very focused on getting us more to a high value interaction and relationship with the customer. So, listening to all of this and being on all these calls and being part of the management team. Now, when I say management team, he created a very large view of the management team. And because he wanted leaders to all be on the same page. So once a year, he had this global managers meeting, GMM, I think is what it was called. And I remember going to some of these and hearing what he had to say. I also was fortunate enough to go on a bunch of sales calls with him, which I don't know why I was picked, but I was told I'm going on these calls with him. And he told me my job was to carry his bag, which was a test to see if I'd actually grab his bag, which I'm like, why am I going to carry your bag? He's like, that's the right answer. If you carry my bag, then I know you're just subjugating to me. And he goes, but the second thing is no joke. You take notes in these meetings. Like you're following up on everything I say. So, but that made you very conscious in the meetings. So we'd have an 1.5 hour long meeting with a customer, and he would come in and he'd start very broadly. He'd open his notebook. He'd only bring a notebook in. He told me to stop bringing my briefcase in the meetings. It embarrassed him. He told me, he goes, you look like a consultant. An executive walks in with a notebook, right? That's it, and a pen. And that was his perspective. And he meant it. And these were lessons I learned. So from then on, it was only a notebook with lots of writing in it by the time we were done. But he said, he would go in there and he would say to the customer, tell me what you're trying to achieve, with us. Or what are we doing if they were an existing client? So that's a question for a prospect who is not really a customer yet or not a customer in this area. Otherwise, he'd be like, okay, tell me what we're doing well and tell me what we need to improve upon. Very simple, high-level things. He might be meeting with the CEO. He might be meeting with the CFO. He might be meeting with the head of supply chain, the head of logistics, the head of manufacturing. These people anybody can answer those questions, right? And I'm telling you, they would just go and he would lead them. And he would take some notes himself, things he thought were really important. But I was taking notes like almost not verbatim, but just so that, we could, when we had a follow-up meeting, a couple of days later, I could remind him of things. He might not remember everything. So I would be like, hey, remember, Ray, when you made that commitment to do X, we got to follow up on that. Who should I call? Who you had somebody in mind. Who do you want me to call? So, those kinds of things. I learned to be attention to detail, how to lead a conversation. It's almost like an interview, and how to get the most out of a client interaction. So those things I got very early on. I learned the art of relationship building from Bill McDermott and watching him. No one is better. No one I have ever met. He is the best relationship manager in technology, bar none. He just knows how to do it. He learns about a person. He learns about their, what motivates them. what potentially is their purpose in life, these kinds of things. He learns that, and he doesn't. This is a gift, something I can't replicate. He doesn't forget anything, like ever. He's just, it's brilliance. It's a brilliance that he has. And frankly, a lot of us don't. Yeah, we try our best. It just ain't gonna happen. So, I've learned by watching and observing through osmosis and then repeating what I
Got it.
see that do as best as I can.
Right. Since I've known you, you've always struck me as somebody who's very purpose driven. So can we talk a little bit about that? Talk to me about what drives you. You work very hard, you work very smart, you work very long hours, and that requires a tremendous amount of commitment and belief, right? That can't be based on something shallow. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, this gets a little deep and stuff that, some things that I normally don't talk about professionally, even at length sometimes with some of my friends. But, I was raised in a religious family, and, I did all the things that young people do who are more deeply committed to their religion. And so I believe that there's a higher purpose that we have on earth that is well beyond us as individuals, and we're not here for, we're not a mistake. We have a reason for being. And so I believe that you need purpose in life, and that grounds you when things are going well with your family, when the health of your family is good and things are good, generally speaking, that gives you the foundation to have, purpose at work. And this is why I think companies have learned over time how important it is to have a purpose. What is your purpose to your customers, number one? And there are other stakeholders that you often have concern for, including your employees. And so what is that purpose? And for me, purpose has always come down to, what is the larger picture beyond yourself, beyond your team? What are we doing this for? Why? And when you can answer, great leaders always have that in mind. And by the way, you become, in some ways, you have to repeat the purpose over and over and over and over again. And the reason why you do that is because it creates institutional memory. It helps everyone ingest and affirm that purpose and then live it, right? Live it. The culture and purpose in some ways are similar. And if you think about it, you talk about culture, and I've heard people say culture is what informs people when you're not in the room. It's what they do when no one's watching, right? And purpose is the same thing. When you have a higher purpose, you know that you're trying to make something better. You're trying to drive advancement, innovation, ingenuity, these kinds of things. And so when you're alone and you're thinking about, okay, how can I be 1% better today? How can I advance the purpose? You keep coming back to it, And so I think being purpose driven is very important. I've always held that near and dear. And I think it, for a lot of us, it comes from how we were raised. We were very fortunate to be raised in a caring family that cared about something that was greater than themselves. And that, stays with you as you advance through your career.
Super helpful. Nice to hear that from you as well. What were some of your biggest challenges as a leader? If you were to pinpoint a couple of things, and how did you deal with them? And talk about the positives of it and the negatives. I think in some of your roles, it can be very lonely. How do you manage that? I mean, that stress and not take it home with you?
Well, first of all, you have to, these relationships that I've talked about are very important. And so you have these relationships at work. And, when you're faced with a particularly difficult dilemma, or even just something that's nagging at you, but it's not you don't know whether it's a big deal or not, but you want someone you can talk to, someone you can trust, that the conversation is in what I call the cone of silence. you have a confidential conversation, and you can effectively bare your soul and say, I'm not really sure about this, or, am I doing the right thing? Should I think of something else? Have I hired the right folks to do this? Am I relying too much on them? Should we be doing more with these other teams, et cetera? So there are always questions that you have, and it's, I think, helpful, beneficial to discuss these things with other people who you trust, who are confidants of yours, but also can provide wisdom, right? They have a different perspective. They're not you. And so, you can go to them, and they may either be close to the situation or not. You kind of want a little bit of both. And so you have this conversation, and they help you. Ultimately, it's up to you to make the decision. It's your job to lead. But as you said, it can be very lonely. And so the way to quell that loneliness is to reach out to others and to build this network, to build these relationships. And there's certain people you can just talk to about these things and get some good advice.
Now, as an introvert, reaching out to people for those soul-searching conversations, I can't imagine was necessarily easy for you, right?
No, it's not. But you have to train yourself to do it, and not try to take everything on yourself. And I think those are probably that's the most consternation I've had in my career, is where I try to take on too much myself, and try to will success into being, when success is never a one-person event. Success always comes with teams, and teams operating at the best level that they possibly can, right? Be your best. Be your best every day in everything that you do. And sometimes what happens is that gets convoluted with, you have to do everything on your own. No. And so as an introvert, I have a tendency that I have to be conscientious of trying to do too much on my own, when, you have tens of thousands or hundreds or whatever the number is of people who you can rely on to help you, right? To help you get something done.
Now, you've worked in technology for many years. In your particular space where you've specialized in, describe that a little bit, and then talk to me about what changes you anticipate seeing over the next couple of years, given the climate that we're in.
Well, I've sort of given you hints of the things that I've worked in my career. A lot of it has been on the, in the customer facing arena, if not, 95% of it. So I'm not, even though on this spectrum, I'm an introvert, I spend most of my time with other people and with customers, and, with teams of people in the field around the world. And so either selling something, getting customers to feel comfortable, because ultimately they buy from people. If you think about this has been the case ever since I've been in technology. These very large contracts do not get signed, generally speaking, or don't get approved by folks in procurement. They get approved by very senior people, in some cases the board. They don't know what they're buying. They haven't been involved in the entire cycle. They have to trust you. They trust the brand that you work for, right? It's known. Or even if it's not, they know that you're the best at it. Like, you came out of nowhere, but everyone tells me you're the best. We talked to Gartner. They said you're the best, this kind of thing. But ultimately, they have to trust you. That will not change. Okay? No amount of generative AI can build trust. It ain't a person. People trust people. They don't trust things. You trust a person, right? People say, well, I trust the tool to do the same thing over and over again. No, you don't. It's built to do that. It's not about trust. You're assuming that thing, that device, that machine has any other purpose and can do anything else. Can't. So it can break, and then isn't doing what you want. But so I think that that's one thing that won't change. What will change is the amount that we rely on technology to help us and to make us better and more productive at what we do. This also really, frankly, hasn't changed since I started in the business. Technology has become more and more pervasive. Again, going back to Bill McDermott, one thing I heard him say recently is that there is no such thing as an IT strategy and a business strategy. They're the same thing. They've morphed, they've conjoined, they are one. And so no seasoned executive, doesn't matter what industry you're in, industrial manufacturing, consumer goods, airlines, transportation, banking, you name it. How pervasive is technology in those industries? It's fundamental. If you don't know how your technologies that you're leveraging and what you're thinking about leveraging, integrate into your processes and into your business, you're doing yourself a disservice. You have to understand that stuff, even at a 30,000-foot level. So what? It's knowledge. Knowledge is power, right? It gives you the ability to make decisions and to lead. And so understanding that, not at the nth degree, not at the code level, right? But at a level that informs you about how this stuff works and why it's valuable, makes you more powerful, makes you better able to describe strategy and why it's important to your employees, to your investors, to the analysts who cover your company, whoever this might be, to your customers. Why are you leveraging this technology to make them a better product? So, or to create a better service environment for them. So I think that what we're going to see, and this is where AI is really going to help us. I think it can be an incredible force for good. And it can, this promise of technology that it takes the mundane, it can do the mundane stuff so you can focus on the higher value stuff. What is really important to your customers? I think that's where AI can really play a significant part and help us further, push technology into the value added space that we're always promising. So I think we're going to see a lot of change, a lot of transformation in the coming years. And I think it's all good.
Thank you. Is there a book that you've read recently that's had an impact on you that you would recommend to other leaders?
I read a lot, and unfortunately for this conversation, I read a lot of nonfiction. And the reason why I read a lot of nonfiction is to take my mind, off things and kind of go away for half an hour or 45 minutes. Yeah. I do read a lot of biographies. I've read a bunch of stuff on Lincoln and the Civil War. And I mean, talk about leadership and having to make change and rely on advisors when information was slow back then, right? No telephones, no internet, just you and other people having a conversation and how you persuade them, and the art of persuasion and the art of the word and how powerful words are. So that's something recently I've been, and I'm about halfway through. This is a long book. It can be, I will say, tedious at times, but I went back to a book that I probably haven't read in 25 years. And it's a book by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged.
Oh, sure.
Atlas Shrugged is ultimately, people read different things into it. It's ultimately about the importance of purpose. You talk about purpose. This is about a couple of individuals who are very focused on what it is that they can achieve and producing something of value. Now, I mean, these lessons can be taken to all parts of your life, but it's ultimately about having a purpose and not letting no get in the way. Understanding that think about the great American experiment, and it was not a preordained outcome that this experiment would succeed, right? That a republic could succeed. In fact, the founders had great doubts that this would actually last as long as we have. And but it takes motivation and a higher purpose, which this country has, called freedom, right? Called the ability to succeed in capitalism, and a country founded on laws, right? Not an individual, not a sovereign, not what he or she has to say, and that's the role. No, our rules are written down. They're on paper, and those are called laws, and then we make new laws, and everyone has to live by them, and everyone under the law should be treated fairly. And so, this is a huge experiment that, by the way, is still in the works. And we see that, succeed and fail many, many times during the course of a year. And so I would say that, Atlas Shrugged is ultimately about how you comport yourself in life, and that you understand that you are responsible for your own actions and your own deeds and your own words, and you have to take responsibility for them. And ultimately, this informs how you lead, and the purpose that you're driven by, and that with hard work and effort and a great team, you can achieve great things. And so, I take that from it. Again, I'm only halfway through a book that I'm still reading it, and I have to say I had forgotten a lot of it. So a lot of the nuance that was there, I'm seeing again, and it's coming back to me. But that's a book that I think has a bunch of lessons in it.
Yeah, that is a great book. Not only that, but that author's life story herself,
Yes.
quite amazing, quite amazing. I think I need to pick that up, because I think when those types of books are so profound that each time you read through it, you come away with a more nuanced perspective. So that's really great. I think I should pick that up as well. What keeps you up at night?
The health and security of my family, and making sure that I'm doing the best for them. That's kind of my purpose. We were talking about purpose earlier, and so I love my time with them. That's ultimately what I live for, and my friends, as well. And so it's making sure that I strike the appropriate balance so that I can get equal time between work and non-work stuff, and knowing that both are important. And so, striking that balance is very important. I would say at work, it's all about, for me, I'm an engine of growth. I become very uncomfortable in any environment where there's no opportunity for growth, or things have stalled out, and I don't, I'm not clairvoyant, so I don't really see around corners. I can look at predictive indicators, and along with the best of them, kind of look at a market opportunity and say, here's where we should go. But I believe in striking while the iron's hot and fast, and experimenting with that, seeing if that works, and if it does, putting more, right? Putting more into the things that I see that can succeed. And I think leadership, and this is kind of what keeps all leaders up at night. It's like, what am I not seeing? There's something that's, is there something that I'm not grabbing onto, that I'm not taking advantage of, or there's a problem that I'm not attenuating to that needs fixing? So I think those are the kinds of things that keep me up at night from a work perspective. And then I think everybody's got something that keeps them up at night.
That reminds me of a book that Andy Grove of Intel wrote years ago. His sentiment was, only the paranoid survive. Do you think that statement's a bit hyperbolic or melodramatic? Because when you take into account balance and family and friends, and then you take account his statement and what he talked about in his book, I don't know if you're familiar with it. How do you balance that? Do you think it's relative in today's generation versus the generation that he was speaking to when he wrote that?
Well, I think, sometimes these statements stick, like only the paranoid survive, because they are in some ways hyperbolic. I mean, and I think that Andy Grove, who built an incredible company that survives him, that he was trying to express sentiment at the time, I think there's some relevance to it today. And that is that it's so important for you to be aware of the environment in which you're working, in which you're competing, and the market in which you're in. And that market is you. If there's a market, there's at least one other doing what it is that you're doing, if not more. And it's important to be aware of those competing aspects and where things are coming from. Because we've seen in our lifetime companies go out of business, companies we never thought would go out of business, like ever. And some companies that have struggled that, when we were kids, were the 800-pound gorillas in business. And so I think you have to have a healthy amount of paranoia. I mean, paranoia is I think it can be destructive. And so you're right, that balance is very important. It's being aware of the market. It's knowing when to really pay attention to some dynamic that you're seeing, and your pricing in new products that are coming out from competitors that you hadn't even thought of. What the heck is going on? These kinds of things, right? And to get together with your leadership team and question, why aren't we thinking about this? Why is our number one competitor going in this area? And we aren't. If you look at, I worked at Siebel Systems. And I worked at Siebel Systems in the early 2000s. And at that time, that's when Salesforce was coming into being. And I'll never forget our founder saying, CEOs and heads of sales are not going to put their crown jewels about their customers in what he called, a shared data center, right? Where all the information is like in one place. Now people do that and they don't even think about it. They don't think about the security of it and the confidentiality of one client's customer base versus another in a shared hub in Salesforce. They know it's safe, right? But back then, we were all still operating in an on-premise server environment, and that's the way things were done. So, was Tom paranoid about that development? You bet he was. You bet he was. And he saw it. He just didn't want, he wasn't telling the world that we were working on a skunkworks project, to do the same thing. And actually, before I think Salesforce was ever out there, he was working on something.
Wow.
And eventually Siebel got sold to Oracle, but Siebel Systems exists to this day. I go to clients and I'm like, what are you using for CRM? Oh, we got Siebel.
Oh,
still.
Okay.
Yeah, still customers are using it. So, I mean, I think it's important to have a healthy skepticism. Healthy is probably the operative word, and a healthy paranoia. But that really involves understanding your market and constantly being aware of what's going on out there and questioning what it is that you do for your customers, why you're doing it, how you can do better, and why is the competition doing something that we're not.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. Last question. You've been a Roosterly client for, I want to say, about a year now. Talk to me about why you decided to use this, what you like about us, how we've impacted your personal brand.
So I think it gets to this notion that you can't do everything on your own, right? And as professionals, we need help as well. And so, you think about in the context of a large corporate environment where there's lots of people in marketing, lots of people in sales, et cetera. But how do you break through the noise? How do you get to your intended audience? And, in terms of the messages that you're trying to get out there that are helpful to your customers, to your sales development efforts, whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so I would suggest to other professionals that if you're interested in getting a boost and getting some help in this area, that you rely on Roosterly for that kind of that intentional help. And this gets back to having a self-awareness of the fact that you can't do everything on your own, and that you need this kind of assistance. And so I would suggest and I would recommend that anybody who wants help getting their message out on social media that they pay a call to Roosterly and get some help.
Very cool. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure chatting with you. I always come away from our conversations feeling positive, feeling like I've gained some sort of kernel of knowledge that I can use to grow and manage our team. Now, we're a very small organization. We're about closing in on about 50 people. We started in 2015. And I found that as we get bigger, I have to change as a leader, as a manager, and I have to espouse sort of almost like a different personality, and it feels like a little bit of imposter syndrome. But when I'm able to get some of the sort of kernels of knowledge and wisdom from folks like you that have been there, that have done that have grown organizations, turned organizations around, it gives me peace of mind. So thank you. I'm sure that other folks will also, that are listening to this, will find your stories and what you've shared with us today super valuable. So thank you very, very much, Keith. Always
You're welcome.
All right,
You're welcome, Irfan. Thank you.